I would like to introduce Member of European Parliament, Paul Tang. He is member of the S&D parliamentary group, and Paul has a major role in taxation issues in Brussels. He is the chair of the European Parliament subcommittee on taxation. Paul also has a PhD in economics from the University of Amsterdam. And as you all know, the parliamentary elections will be held this June. And Paul will talk to us about the EU tax agenda of the next European parliamentary term. Paul, welcome, and the stage is yours. Now it should be on.
Does it work? Yes, I believe it does, right. Okay, thank you. It's good to be here. Before I forget saying, taxation is all about fairness. I come from a country where we started a revolution because of a tax increase. In the 16th century, there was the Habsburg rule, Philip II, and he was defending Catholicism. And that was uncomfortable in Holland, in the Netherlands, because there were not only Catholic but Protestants, followers of Luther and Calvin. And that led to conflict between, you could say, Spain and the Netherlands, or the empire of Philip II and the provinces in the Netherlands. But very much part of that uprising was taxation. Philips didn't have the money, so he sent troops to the Netherlands to squash the revolt. He sent his most harsh general to do that, who had a fierce reputation, and he lived up to that reputation. He invaded cities, and citizens were killed, women raped, and as a retribution for the revolt in the Netherlands. But what Philips did do was let the Dutch pay for that invasion, because he was a king and an emperor, but always in lack of money. He issued debt, reneged on debt several times, so he was always short of money. And one way to pay for the let's say the invasion, or he sort of let's call the invasion in the Netherlands, was to let the Dutch pay for that. Well, that was a bridge too far, I would say. So that shows that paying taxation needs to be fair, and it's also true, still true nowadays. I come from a tax haven, as you just saw. And I've been in the middle of discussions on this. I was an economist by training. I saw then already the race to the bottom occurring, and I saw that as a problem. So when I went into politics, I wanted to address the issue of the race to the bottom and the role that the Netherlands played. And I continued to do that when I came to the European Parliament. In fact, in the European Parliament, one of my best actions was to have the European Parliament state that there are tax havens in Europe. And most notably, there were Ireland, Luxembourg, Malta, Cyprus, and the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, that was big news. But it was part of an ongoing debate in the Netherlands about paying or not paying taxes. And it was not just politicians like me who put it on the agenda. There were NGOs working on that, journalists doing the deep dive into the accounts and trying to figure out how much or how little the companies, corporates pay. And that was led to a change. And I think focal point in that discussion was the Shell company, the oil company, who was at that time still based both in the UK and in the Netherlands. I always challenged the Shell. You're a Dutch large multinational based in the Netherlands, but you don't pay corporate tax in the Netherlands. They always try to avoid this challenge. They try to avoid me in general. But in the end, when I left national parliament, I was in European parliament, it came out that indeed Shell did not pay any corporate taxation in the corporate taxes in the Netherlands. Well, that leads to a very odd situation here. We have here a large Dutch multinational, and I and my neighbor on the right and my neighbor on the left pay more taxes than Shell, the oil company. Well, that isn't fair, is it? And that led to changes. For Shell in particular, they started to pay taxes, but it also all this debate about profit shifting, little or no taxes being paid by the multinational led to a change in the thinking in Netherlands, because the Netherlands is a very typical tax haven that you see in Europe and in other countries. Sarah showed the profit per employee, but you can also see it in the statistics of foreign direct investment. There are huge flows. Just look at the official statistics. There are huge flows in and out of out of countries. You see this is true for Luxembourg, this is true for Ireland, this is true for the Netherlands. Now that is still the case in the Netherlands, so the thinking has changed. The action still needs to follow in the Netherlands. Let me be clear on that. But the thinking also changed because there was a hard public debate on the corporates. And at one point, the corporates decided this was not worth their time. This was not worth their reputation. And that made it change. There you see, at one point they realized that these huge in and outflows that you see in the Netherlands has little to do with the real economic activity. It's not real investment. The IMF calls this also phantom investment, because it's investment that is done on paper, that is intended to avoid taxation. It's nothing to do with real economic activity. So this change in thinking indeed has become accepted, because there's a separation between what is real investment, real activities, you could say, by real multinationals, and all the phantom investment that are just constructed to avoid taxation. And I think this is very helpful in the debate. I visited Ireland, where the statistical office also has introduced the concept of phantom investment. Wonderful. So Ireland is going in the right direction, because if you can make the distinction between real investment and phantom investment, that's a big start. But my point is, whereas the Netherlands has gotten to a position where there is one of the most important, well, OECD calls it investment hubs, the European Parliament calls it tax havens, one of the most important tax havens in the world, that is changing because it is perceived to be unfair. In that sense, fairness is still a driving force in the discussion on taxation. I moved from national parliament to the European Parliament, still involved in the fight against the race to the bottom and the fight for tax fairness, you could say. And it was interesting to see that what was important in the Netherlands is also important in the European Parliament. I was able to initiate a committee on tax affairs. I will say a bit more about that history. And we were able to work very well together, even though the political groups all have very different views on the role of the government and therefore on the importance of taxation. There are low tax political parties, high tax political parties. Why could we work together? Because we share a common concept of fairness, and that is that everyone should pay taxes and follow the rules. That's what we have in common. And from this basis, you can have a cross-party cooperation to fight tax evasion and tax avoidance. Now, this came about also in the European Parliament because there were many revelations. When I started in the European Parliament, it was 2014. You had LuxLeaks, and then it was Panama Papers, Paradise Papers with Bono in it, and then later the last version was the Pandora Papers. And revelations also show that tax avoidance and tax evasion is something that cannot stand the light of day. If it comes out in the public, that is perceived as unfair and is bound to lead to changes. In the European Parliament, it led to a succession of temporary committees on taxation, and then was able to turn it, in this made, to a permanent committee on taxation. And in that role, I of course also visited all the tax havens that you saw on the list from Sarah, because I don't want to have to fight just in the Netherlands, but we also went to Luxembourg and Ireland. Luxembourg still in complete denial, by the way. Ireland debate is more open, I would say. We also visited Singapore and Switzerland, who are absolutely not used to this discussion on tax havens. So it's good to go. But more generally, what we did is also to reach out to national parliaments, because there's an odd situation where we're here. In the European Parliament, we are, I think, the best informed about the ongoing debates at European and international level. We know what's going on in the Council. We know what's going on within the OECD. And that helps us to have impact on that debate. However, our formal competences are very little. The formal competences lie with the national parliament, because taxation is still a national competence, a uniquely national competence and not a European competence. So what we try to do is also to reach out to national parliaments to see, be informed, know what's going on. And even the larger parliaments in Europe are no match to the decision making at European and international level. Because we also have been to the Bundestag in Germany, to the Assemblée Nationale in France. But even the larger parliaments are not very well informed about the ongoing debates, let alone know how to step into that debate, to have an impact, to express their political will. I find that somewhat disturbing. So that was the lesson that I learned also on intergovernmental decision making. We have that on taxation in the Council. But we also saw that within the OECD. I find it deeply problematic because it's lacking democratic scrutiny. The role of the national parliaments is almost nil in this. It's behind closed door. It's done, you could say, by civil servants who may or may not have a mandate from their minister, but that's about it. And that is, whereas we know that taxation is deeply political. I just gave you the two examples, which were from my country, and in Finland and in other countries, it's not different. Taxation is deeply political, but the discussions about it are not. And that's, I find, very disturbing. And that's, I think, why it's good, why at least the European Parliament takes on this role to be informed and to be engaged, not just in the debate itself within the Council and in the OECD, but also trying to involve national parliaments. To give you one example, by the way, was on the OECD. Was a very difficult negotiations. The OECD. Who said that? By the way, no, it's not too bad. But someone made the remark just now. It's very complicated because you have so many countries on the table. True, and I think it's good that the OECD tried to have what is called an inclusive framework. Because, yeah, let's face it, the OECD is a club of rich countries, right? But they try to expand that and to reach out to the rest of the world and to include them in the debate. But in the end, when the final decisions had to be made on Pillar 2, the minimum tax rate, on Pillar 1, the tax for the 100 largest multinational, it was not even the OECD Secretariat that was still in charge or leading the discussion. The European Commission was sidelined. It was just calls between ministers of finance of France, Germany, the US. So it's just very 19th century in its approach. And my problem as a politician or as a member of parliament there's no democratic scrutiny of this process. Whereas we know that taxation is deeply political. Now, I would just do a short introduction and then we do the Q&A. I think that's more fun. But let me try to... I think this is important because what we will see in Europe is hopefully, I would say as a politician, but most likely I'm going to say as observer, an expansion in membership of the EU. We're living in a very different world. And it's time that as part of the geopolitical tensions that to face the geopolitical tensions that we in our world, that we also take on board, for example, Ukraine, but also the Western Balkan countries. That's a discussion that is going to come. We're not going into that discussion, but let's say it's very likely to happen in one way or another. But we now know that there are still, and that question, this brings the decision making in the EU into question. We have policy areas where there is no European decision making. It's by consensus, or other words, there is a veto from single member states. So it's intergovernmental. This goes for foreign policy, which is of course stupid. But it also goes for taxation and other areas. So the question we had already in 2004 when Eastern European countries entered, we're going to have again how we would like the EU to function. Now, Social Democrats always say, well, we want to have majority voting, so ordinary legislative procedure in Europe. Because it will, if we don't, we won't see any progress. There will always be a country to block. And that is true, by the way. What you see is that the usual suspects, like Ireland and Luxembourg, are trying to block progress in the area of taxation. But I bring to you also the argument that's very important for the democratic scrutiny. The current situation as it is right now is undemocratic. The Finnish parliament has nearly nothing to say on the minimum effective tax rate. And I find that odd. So we need to find ways to have parliamentary involvement into this. And one way to do it, to have it at European level. Now, I don't say that you need to make all taxation European. I would say taxation that should go to the European level are those where we see that tax bases are mobile. This goes for profits. This goes for forms of wealth, where we perfectly aware that they can easily cross borders. So once the tax bases become mobile, I think we should have European decision making. Not just because it will, otherwise there will be no progress, but also for democratic scrutiny. And on the lack of progress, you might sort of think about the next presidencies of the EU. I think we have Hungary, Poland, Denmark, Cyprus and Ireland are the next 5 presidencies. So if you have consensus, need to arrive on consensus under these presidencies, I don't see much progress in tax files, in all honesty. That's an extra bit. So this is one of the challenges we have. That's the expansion of the EU in a world with geopolitical tensions. We can't allow the Western Balkan to be the playground for Russian or Chinese interference. The other challenge, I think it's already been mentioned also by Sarah, and I think it's huge, don't underestimate it. There are huge strains on the public sector. We know all that our societies are graying, that expenditure on cure and care will rise. That's been a long-run trend. We have become aware that we need to spend more on security and defense. and your country knows that best. You have been in the middle of that discussion. And we still need a huge effort, private and public, to make our economies sustainable. These are quite huge investments. We are not nearly there at this point. There are estimates of 1.5 trillion each year. Still, it's a couple of percent of European GDP. Extra investment that we need, and it needs to be from private and public sector. So, and at the same time, we see some European countries that are indebted. So and especially within the Eurozone, you can't have all the debt that you want. It's easier if you have your own currency, I would say. So within the Eurozone, we need to have some discipline on public debt. So we have the challenge of raising a rising demand for, let's say, public investment, defense, sustainability, and the other one, the need to maintain, to control public debt. There's an obvious way out, and that would be taxation, right? And I think we should keep that option at least open. I say this to, as a social democrat, I would say, of course, we don't want austerity. But also to the other political parties, I say, well, keep your options open, given that you have this huge need for investment, public and private. You need to be able also to raise taxes. And what better way to start by increasing the fight against tax avoidance, to let those pay who do not pay their fair share right now. That would be the way to start. I think that's a huge challenge. Now, let me go then quickly to what is in store. And I think it was already, to some degree, highlighted by Sarah. I think, more generally, that we need to have more equal taxation. We need to strive for equal taxation of labor and capital. I think we come from a time where labor was seen as immobile, to be taxed, capital was mobile, a small country could not tax capital, and that means you see this race to the bottom in taxation on profits and on wealth. Right? I think that has changed. Because one reason why we are better able to tax is because there's more and more information coming. I do not always agree. I like the reports by the EU Tax Observatory. I do not always agree with their assessment, I must say. I think the exchange of information is crucial. But in all honesty, it's about bank accounts, which are not the most interesting forms of wealth. So yes, the Dutch don't bring their bags of cash to the Swiss bank, that has stopped, fine. Or the Germans to the Austrian banks, that has stopped. But let's face it, most wealth is not held in bank accounts. It's held real estate, luxury goods like cars, boats, planes, art, jewelry. And of course, it's held in corporates. Now it's interesting that we can make progress in producing this information and exchanging this information. Eero Ainalumuluma, I always find it difficult to pronounce his names, even after 4 or 5 years. You have to correct me if I say it wrong. And I were very much involved in the new package on anti-money laundering. And this is exactly where we pushed. We need to have the information on real estate, land, including land, cars, boats, planes, and we're trying to start to build registers for that. And by the way, we need to know better on the ownership of companies, the ultimate beneficial owner. This certainly, so the data should be improved. For the current registers are not good enough. Data need to be improved. But also a foreign company who wants to do business within the EU, ultimate beneficial ownership should be known. Interesting, because this is in the context of money laundering. But the better information we get, the more we can also use that for taxation purposes. That's the next step. This information is coming, it needs to be included into, and this is an area which goes relatively well. There was the mentioning earlier on crypto. It has been taken on board in the anti-money laundering package. I think all the crypto asset service providers will have the same obligation as banks to start with. But there's also an exchange of information between tax administrations on holding of crypto assets, right? Like any other financial asset, it's being treated. So that's, but this is where we can make progress. And I say that because once you can, as I say, measure the wealth, you can tax the wealth. And this is where what has changed in the past years, when we say the early 2000s, when it was still difficult because there was no exchange of information and the data were not available. The exchange of the information has started, but we need to expand the data set to a large degree, especially because we see a huge concentration of wealth, right? This is why I don't believe that the exchange of information has been so effective. We have been exchanging data of very ordinary citizens. Okay, fine. But this is not where the money is. The ones that escape paying taxes are the very wealthy. It's like Warren Buffett say, hey, I pay less tax than my secretary. You knew that, of course. And we all know that, so we need to make sure that we pay that. So this is the idea of a global tax or an OECD initiative to come forward with a tax. I think we should put it on the table. Not always as a way to achieve it immediately. In politics, you sometimes have to be patient. But like I said, fairness is very much driving issues in taxation. And by putting on the agenda, you will show that it's unfair. We see huge concentration of wealth, and the most wealthy do pay less taxes than average. Well, go after them. That will bring about a change. But for European level, it would be the exchange of information. And second, of course, is a discussion on corporate taxation. One of the other way that we know that the tax mobile is the tax base is mobile. I've always been very much a fan of unitary taxation, right? Take the global profit of a firm and allocate it across country. It's relatively easy, and it's robust, and it is modern, you could say, because the current corporate tax system started. The OECD always likes to point it out, and they're right. They started in the early 20th century. The current corporate tax system, at a point we didn't have multinational corporations, so the system is not up to date. There's a system of transfer prices with so much opportunity to shift profits around. It has been, and this system has become obsolete. It's out of date. There will always be opportunity for profit shifting. So what the minimum effective tax rate does, I very much welcome it, but is to at least to have a sort of a bottom in the race to the bottom. But it's not a fundamental change. We can make the tax system really more simple and more robust by moving to a form of unitary taxation. I campaigned for that when the so-called CCCTB came out. I hate the acronym. It was a consolidated corporate tax base. And it's back. And now the acronym is better. It's BFIT. That's an improvement. I still think it will be still very difficult to do, but we should keep that in mind, that that's one way forward. Until that time, I think you should also look for the obvious places where we lack taxation. One of them, coming back, I think, will be the digital service tax. We see the largest corporation in the world paying less than average taxes, and these are all American companies. I think Europe needs to put pressure on the US either to adopt Pillar 1 or they will get a European digital service tax. And the European citizens will love it. They don't understand why we don't tax the largest corporations in the world where they operate on our soil. Second, I think we should still move very much against the vehicles of tax avoidance. The shell companies are still on the table, but also take a closer look at the tax havens. And last but not least, and I think, because I have little time, then we go to the Q&A, sorry, I took a bit more time. We need to also to look, and this is my experience also from the Netherlands, we also need to look at the profession of tax advisors. Who of you here is a tax advisor? No one? Is it? Too bad. I think they have been very instrumental in finding ways to avoid taxation. Because I started to wonder, why is the Netherlands so pivotal in the system of tax avoidance? And at one point I realized we become specialized in it. We have a whole industry. We train them, educate them, give them first a job in the government before they go to the private tax. We're just bloody good at it, and we're not gonna. That is not gonna change unless you have a tax profession that takes into account that they have a public purpose as well. Because that's what I find interesting. What I've discovered, there are very liberal countries. That is the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Ireland. They don't have any restriction on the profession of tax advisors. And then you have Germany and Austria, who say, no. The tax advisor is for us like a notary. They serve private clients, but they have a public purpose. And therefore they need to be regulated. So I think it's very good if we bring this, make a change in this profession. There are many good tax advisors, to be clear. It's always about the small group that spoils it for the large group. But we need to regulate this profession, because otherwise we will have always this industry that will look for the loopholes in tax regulation. And let's face it, there will always be loopholes. Still a lot to do. We made progress in the last year, not only because of the minimum effective tax rate that you can see, and that these changes have been driven by fairness. So we need to make sure that on the agenda that taxation needs to be fair, work on that to make it more fair, and do that step by step. There are plenty of opportunities to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
Yes.
Have a seat.
Okay,
let's take a few questions. I could start about asking that where are the most progressive powers in EU when we're talking about combating the tax evasion? Who have done the most at the moment?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I'm because my clients say we have not done enough, right? So that's enough. And 2 weeks ago, I'm always. It's for me easy to say who I'm disappointed in, because I remember having a meeting. Well, it was this week actually, with a German representative, and I learned to appreciate France by they put topics on the agenda. For example, Bruno Le Maire also put the DST on the agenda also in Europe, and I very much appreciate that. Germany is always sort of following an agenda, not their own, and they are in that sense conservative. Whereas I think that these countries are the ones that have a clear interest in fighting tax avoidance and evasion, because they have the highest corporate tax rates. So you can imagine how profits are shifted away from Germany and France towards, well, a country like the Netherlands, and then outside Europe. That's what's happening. So I think and I'm always slightly disappointed in Germany that they don't take a more active stand. They are the main losers from the race to the bottom, I would say. So that's the easy answer. Who has been working on it? I very much hope that my country will play a positive role in the years to come, and I think it does. For example, there's a proposal on the shell companies, do scrutiny on the shell companies. It's called the On-Shell Directive. And I hear that Denmark and the Netherlands are very active in this. And this is a real change for the Netherlands. So I very much hope we can keep that momentum and also set an example for other countries that this is where we need to push.
What's behind the change in the atmosphere, for example, in Netherlands? What has happened?
I tried to explain that a bit before, but it's interesting to think about it a bit further. I think it was very crucial that in the thinking of, let's say, the corporates and their representatives, the employer organization, they came to the conclusion there's this distinction between real and phantom investment. That is okay. So, and they are there to, let's say, to serve the interest of the multinationals and the other corporates, but the real economic activity. And once they made that sort of distinction between real and phantom, they said, okay, this is not worth the trouble. This is not worth the trouble. And like I said, I've been in Ireland and in Luxembourg. You see a difference. I think the debate in Ireland is more open than in Luxembourg, and it also has to do with how many NGOs and journalists are there. Because let's face it, in Luxembourg you have one newspaper. And that's it, right? So I expect somehow sooner a change in Ireland, because there you see a more active community of NGOs, but also more journalists active in this area. Because it's first people have to become aware what's going on in their country before they are prepared to take action. This is what happened in the Netherlands. In fact, we had an awareness campaign for more than 10 years. Giving examples, fighting, saying, "Well, this can't be done." So I saw this in an awareness campaign, and now we are time to move to action. So it starts by raising awareness. We don't need this as a country.
Any questions from the audience? There. Oh, plenty. That's good.
Hi, so Maria Volanen from the Technology Industries of Finland. Thank you so much for this presentation. I have two questions.
Sure.
So one regarding the qualified majority voting and one on the allocation formula. So you are also from a small country as Finland, and talking about fairness in taxation. How would you see the qualified majority voting being fair, or how could it be decided on a way that it's fair on a country level as well, so that big countries wouldn't have the majority of the voting, or that they have more to say, that small countries wouldn't have a possibility to have a veto right. So has there been discussion on another level of majority? If there is like one or two countries blocking the tax proposals, could there be another level of majority, for example, 80%, 90% of the population or countries? And the other question is that you said that the unitary taxation would be a preferred proposal, but do you have a comment on the allocation formula, on how it would be divided between countries? And again, this is about the fairness on a country level.
Sure.
Thank you.
Now, when it comes to decision making, what countries need to do, and I always tell this also to the minister of my country, we need to engage. So Europe is ours, right? And the best way to make it, to keep it ours, is to engage. So I'm open to, should it be a simple majority, or should it be a qualified majority? Fine. And I think it could also be a qualified majority. But that would require, if a country like Finland has a very strong opinion, that you find allies. Well, probably if you're alone, maybe it's maybe your view, but if you cannot convince others, others to share your story, it's maybe not that strong after all, I could say. So I'm not that, I don't think it will be easily imposed, because you can always go out, find your allies with similar views, and get organized on this. When it comes, and I don't think also that there is quite a tradition in the European Council to take each other's interest into account, right? So it's hard it's hardly ever that we push a country to the brink. Yeah, in the case of Orban, but yeah, okay, what else can we do? But I think it's a good tradition to take each other's interests into account anyway. So we know there are deep felt feelings or sensitive issues, and I think the other countries are aware what these issues are and try to take that into account. So that doesn't really concern me. I think what concerns me more is sort of the idea that you lose your formal competences, which you always say, yeah, but Helsinki needs to have a say on. You already lost that when it comes to mobile tax bases, I would say. The sovereignty is empty in that sense. You regain sovereignty by having European decision making where you can have a say. Yeah, not on your own, you need to form coalition, but at least you have a say. Finland had no say whatsoever in the OECD decision making, by the way. It had no say in the race to the bottom. So, hey, yeah, you can only improve by having European decision making. When it comes to unitary taxation, of course, it's the discussion on the formula. I don't think we ever got to that point really. That we were starting to, what should the formula look like? We know. In the proposal on the CCTB, there were 3 elements: employment, investment, and now it slips my mind. Surely, can someone? Sorry. Oh, of course, sales. Of course, they're all observable. What you see in the US, it has moved to only sales, to only consumers. Maybe that's the easiest, but apart from that, there is an allocation issue. And what is very difficult at this stage, and still it was then and it still is now, we don't know what the exact consequences are. And that will also make it difficult to make progress, because ministries of finance will say, this is a proposal, and I don't know what the budgetary consequences will be. Yeah, I find it fair that they, let's say, are cautious then, I can imagine. So, but that shows that the data are not there, that this is not this is available at the national level, data are not shared, so this is a bit of a political process as well. But I would say the apportionment needs to be robust, right? I think that's very important, and needs to be such that it doesn't start a revolution from day one. You can have a sort of period where you start with sort of mimicking the current situation and then let it evolve over time.
And then one, okay, that was answered already. So of that, and the back row. Yeah.
Thank you for presentation. My name is Alex Niemi. So my question is related to allocation formula and what you mentioned about unified tax and what Sarah mentioned earlier about incentivization of various governments. So I'm trying to make a bridge here. So what I'm thinking, in the global world, my take is and my feel is that we are in the same situation like 100 years ago when industrialization started to form. So what we see between the countries is the same what we see within countries now. We have low-wage workers. Similarly, we have, in a way, low-wage countries. Even on the European scale, we have more developed, less developed, whose primary source of income is low-wage, tourism, agriculture, and then we have high-technology countries. So what is your feel if we scaled social democratic way of equalizing wealth gap by more progressive taxation and incentivizing governments to implement it, and then using the same ways what we have within countries by distributing the extra income more fairly between countries with a budget surplus to the countries who are lagging behind?
Yeah, but I think it's important that, of course, but I'm a social democrat, so it's very clear that I think fairness and solidarity is very important, both at the national level and at the European level. I do also think that solidarity at the European level needs to grow over time. It's not something you can impose I think we have seen in the past the past years with all the crises, COVID, energy, that you see that our faiths are more connected, and we come closer to a community, which make it easier to step up to the plate and help each other, right? So this is what forges a community. So I think it's good to have this European solidarity, and I hope and think it will grow over time as we get more accustomed to the idea that we are a community. The crisis have brought that, and I think the outside threats, let's say the election of Trump, will again have that effect. And at the same time, I think it's what you see in this world, what I find something striking. The little support Europe and the US get from the global South, right? You see that very much in the war on the war between Russia and Ukraine. Not very much outspoken support for the European position. So I think we also, and this is what you also saw in the OECD agreement. Is it fair also to the global South? Yeah. I think that I think, by the way, it's hard to tell. The numbers are not out there, but by the fact that there are a lot of countries raising these questions, they don't see it as fair yet, right? And like I said, and when you look at the process that led to this decision, I can understand that. So it's about the output is unknown at this stage. What will be the result of the minimum effective tax rate? But the input, the decision process was clearly not fair for everyone. So, but I think that's important that we keep that in mind, because we want in a world where we have these geopolitical tensions. You want to have allies, and so here it's. Yes, I think we need to have solidarity with the most poor in the world, but I think it's also in our own interest to have to do that.
Okay, we are running out of time,
Sorry,
but
I'm
there's
too long.
still no
Okay.
problem. There was still one question coming from the back row. Let's take the last row question and make the question very short and quick answer. Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Niko Pankko from the Central Organization of the Finnish Trade Unions. How do you see the political landscape right now in the EU in forms of tax reform? Because I think the need for additional resources or revenues is quite obvious, for example, from the climate change investment side. And you cannot balance the economy with spending cuts forever, right?
Exactly.
And it seems a bit odd that the tax reforms are hugely unpopular, especially in Southern Europe, even though it would seem that the tax reforms would be a better way to balance the economy if we compare it to, for example, adding the burden of membership fees, for example. So how do you see why these reforms are so unpopular, and what could we do about from political side?
I'm not so sure they are unpopular, in all honesty. I think they are not really top of mind yet, right? So that's for the left-wing parties. They have the job to bring this forward, saying we know ways, and I think that has a good chance, right? Because I started out in my fight against the tax haven Netherlands as a left-wing politician, but I found out that the support was much broader, because we have a common concept of fairness, and I see this also with wealth and capital. I see there's a big opportunity here. Yeah, it maybe starts on the left wing, but I think will be broadly accepted by a majority of political views and a majority of the population, because people find it fair. If you're that rich, you should at least pay taxes, and maybe more than I do. People find it. Absolutely. So there's a lot to win there. What you see, and this is the conservative rhetoric of the small government, right? So they fight the need for what we know data reporting requirements, because that's an administrative burden, and blah, 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 blah. So this is this is the sort of the usual fight that we have. but we can win on the fight of fairness, because this is broadly shared, and that's my impression. Also, if you look at the right-wing populists, some of the right-wing populists have very socio-economic left-leaning policy proposals, right? So and there you see, so this is where it starts to, and this is where we need to, so I believe that we can win there if we can put it on the agenda. This is why we sometimes need to put, let's say, wealth taxation on the agenda, not because we think it will be realized in 5 years from now, but to show how unequal the society is, sometimes is, but also to show that we can do better in this. And then you will make, and they will start to make progress. So in that sense, I'm optimistic, but it requires hard work from our side. That's true.
Hey, it would be lovely to continue this discussion. Sorry, we have to move forward. Thank you, Paul, for your insight, and thanks for the audience for the questions.